It's Tuesday, April 8th, 2025, Black Monday 2.0, not quite. Chief Justice Roberts chimes in on another matter, and violence is inherent to the leftists. Don't let them surprise you. Next on the AM Update.
President Trump again gave himself maximum negotiating leverage, and just when he achieved the maximum leverage, he's willing to start talking.
The European Union's been very bad to us. They don't take our cars. Like Japan in that sense. They don't take our agricultural product.
I can tell you that I said to the President very simply, we will eliminate the trade deficit with the United States.
Donald Trump thinks that he can place his hands anywhere.
Last night, the Supreme Court sided with Donald Trump, allowing him to use the Alien Enemies Act to deport trendy Aragua gang members from Venezuela. He got into hot water with that stupid judge, James Boasberg, who tried to tell the Trump administration to literally turn planes around who were loaded with those criminal illegal aliens, which, of course, all illegal aliens are criminals, but these violent gang members. This judge tried to tell the Trump administration to turn those planes around. He failed. And of course, he failed now in his challenge of the Alien Enemies Act being invoked to remove terrorists from U.S. soil. Trump reacted in a post on Truth Social last night, quote, "The Supreme Court has upheld the rule of law in our nation by allowing a president, whoever that may be, to be able to secure our borders and protect our families and our country itself. A great day for justice in America." It was a 5-4 decision at the Supreme Court, with all the men voting in favor of allowing Trump to use his duly vested powers, and all 4 females on the Supreme Court voting against that notion, including Amy Coney Barrett, Trump appointee to the nation's highest court. One of the most depressing and just biggest regrets I have in my career is ever expressing support for Amy Coney Barrett, because she has been a disappointment. Nevertheless, a big win in court for the Trump administration, as they can use the Alien Enemies Act. They got the okay from the judiciary to deport violent gang members. CNBC's Jim Cramer over the weekend said multiple times that he thought we would see losses of around 20%, a Black Monday 2.0 in the U.S. stock market. Not quite. There were losses of less than a point in the S&P 500, as well as the Dow Jones. The Nasdaq was actually up after late last week's volatility. So not great news for investors, but not the crash that some were fearing over the weekend, as Trump and his White House continues to navigate the tariff war. Here's Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who says he's going to be visiting with and negotiating with Japan.
Larry, I can tell you that there are 50, 60, maybe almost 70 countries now who have approached us. So it's going to be a busy April, May, maybe into June. And Japan is a very important military ally. They're a very important economic ally. And the U.S. has a lot of history with them. So I would expect that Japan's going to get priority just because they came forward very quickly. But it's going to be very busy. And if President Trump again gave himself maximum negotiating leverage, and just when he achieved the maximum leverage, he's willing to start talking.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was at the White House yesterday, and he discussed the ongoing tariffs.
First, if I can mention tariffs, it's a subject of some interest to him. I can tell you that I said to the President very simply, we will eliminate the trade deficit with the United States. We intend to do it very quickly. We think it's the right thing to do, and we're going to also eliminate trade barriers, a variety of trade barriers that have been put up unnecessarily. And I think Israel can serve as a model for many countries who ought to do the same. I recognize the position of the United States that says, we're allowing other countries to put tariffs on us, but we don't put tariffs on them. And I'm a free trade champion, and free trade has to be fair trade.
As Benjamin Netanyahu saying all the right things you would hope an ally would be saying at this moment. Of course, it's not just the trade deficits that are the main problem. For instance, you're always going to have a deficit. You're always going to be buying more from a place like, I don't know, Zimbabwe, than they're going to be buying of your products, just because of the disparity in population. However, it is the barriers to trade that I think the Trump White House is trying to address comprehensively. But in terms of people like China and India trying to get those those economies under control and address some real systemic problems like intellectual property theft and other matters. Those are the countries that are really screwing us right now. At the White House, speaking of that, Donald Trump talked about the European Union.
The European Union's been very bad to us. They don't take our cars, like Japan in that sense. They don't take our agricultural product. They don't take anything practically. And yet they send millions of cars in a year, Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, BMWs. They're sending millions and millions of cars into the U.S., but we don't have a car that's been sold to the European Union or other places, but let's go for the European Union. And it's not going to be that way. It's got to.
So we're going to find out, I think, as these trade negotiations unfold. We're going to find out if there are markets in places like the European Union and various countries in the European Union. If there's a market for more, like Chevrolet. Now, Ford already does a lot of business over, especially in the UK, but the rest of Europe. But is there a market for Chevrolet-produced cars and other vehicles? Is there a market for that in other European Union countries? That's basically, from my vantage point, that's basically what President Trump is asking for. We just want access, fair access to your markets, which they don't have right now. Of course, the big whale that they are going after, as I mentioned earlier, is China. President Trump fired off a massive tariff threat again yesterday against China after the communist government responded with retaliatory tariffs against the U.S. The president announced tariffs on numerous countries on Wednesday, but had singled out China as one of the worst offenders for additional tariffs. The Chinese government responded with its own 34% tariff increase on the U.S. On Monday, Trump wrote on social media he would respond with a staggering 50% tariff against China if it didn't back down. China has responded by, allegedly, from what I've seen, dumping a bunch of U.S. treasuries and devaluing their own currency, as they have been known to do basically my entire life. As I said, the stock market collapse that everybody was looking for didn't really materialize yesterday. We'll see what it does the rest of the week. The NASDAQ was up, S&P 500 and Dow Jones were down less than a point. That can't be said for a bunch of other markets around the world. Basically, every single leading economy's stock market was down, but not dramatically. I think the worst was the South Korean stock exchange. That was down 13 points yesterday. So again, keeping an eye on this, I don't know what the end goal of these tariffs are going to be. I think there's a number of things that they could be going for, as we discussed yesterday. But I do think they're just being used as a cudgel right now, a negotiating tactic, a negotiating tool. If it does turn into this is just a new form of revenue extraction, then we can have a different conversation. But it just seems, so far from what I've seen yesterday and what Trump indicated at the White House, it seems like they just view these as a negotiating ploy in order to get better trade deals, maybe reshoring some critical industry and some other matters, especially isolating China. President Trump yesterday just endorsed the budget plan that the United States Senate passed. He wrote in a post on Truth Social, quote, "The budget plan just passed by the United States Senate has my complete and total endorsement and support. All of the elements we need to secure the border, enact historic spending cuts, and make tax cuts permanent, and much more are strongly covered and represented in the bill." Thank you to Senate Majority Leader John Thune. So permanent tax cuts, some historic spending cuts. President Trump says, I'm sure, though, spending cuts are verboten in Washington, D.C. We'll see how deep those actually go, if they can actually codify some of the waste and abuse that DOJ has found. The Supreme Court on Monday temporarily paused a federal judge's midnight deadline to return a Salvadorian national who was, they say, mistakenly deported while the justices weigh the case. Chief Justice John Roberts set a 5 p.m. on Tuesday deadline for a response from Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia's attorney after the Trump administration argued the lower court order improperly imposed on the president's foreign policy powers. So this story you might have heard of. There was an El Salvador illegal alien that the left says was illegally deported. I'm not sure what argument they made for that. So he's now sitting in an El Salvador jail, and some pissant district court judge told the Trump administration to go back to El Salvador and get this guy and bring him back. He's an El Salvador citizen in an El Salvador jail, and some district court told the Trump administration to basically do a military operation to extract him. I wish I had the amount of free time in a day that it seems like a lot of these justices enjoy. There's a Texas man arrested by the feds for allegedly threatening to kill ICE agents. Well, he made his first appearance in federal court yesterday and was kept detained. Robert King is charged with transmitting an interstate threat and faces up to 5 years in federal prison if convicted. Feds say he posted on social media he would shoot ICE if seen in his neighborhood and urged his followers to stop being, quote-unquote, pansies and kill the ICE agents. He then allegedly doubled down in another post, again, urging his followers to kill Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers, adding, quote, no mercy for the Gestapo. His next detention hearing is on Wednesday. Yeah, you can't just mouth off like that. Still in this country, you can't just mouth off on that and expect zero repercussions. But violence and threats of violence are a hallmark of the left. We'll talk more about that. There's a new study that really codifies that. Talk more about that in Air Analysis. But first, when we come back, a troon in Congress says Donald Trump wants to touch him. What is going on with HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? And a guy in Florida tried to screw around and he found out after he went into a women's restroom. It's all coming up next.
Because while we know that Donald Trump thinks that he can place his hands anywhere, we're telling him, hell no, hands off our Social Security. Hands off.
This is Congressman Tim McBride, who goes by Sarah. He's a man who thinks he is a woman, talking about how President Trump wants to put his hands on him. Now, Congressman McBride, nobody wants to put their hands on you. Anyway, like no one does. Literally no one. So that little detail, you got that wrong. Congressman McBride spoke at one of those AstroTurf paid-for rallies all over the country over the weekend. That's where he made those comments. What is going on with HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? Now, this is the second time his voice is full-throated, we think maybe, support for the MMR vaccine. Posted on social media over the weekend, quote, I came to Gaines County, Texas today to comfort the Hildebrand family after the loss of their 8-year-old daughter, Daisy. I got to know the family of the 6-year-old Kaylee Fair after she passed away in February. I also developed bonds with and deep affection for other members of this community during that difficult time. My intention was to come down here quietly to console the families and to be with the community in their moment of grief. I'm also here to support Texas health officials and to learn how our HHS agencies can better partner with them to control the measles outbreak, which as of today, there are 642 confirmed cases of measles across 22 states, 499 in Texas. In early March, I deployed a CDC team to bolster local and state capacity for response across multiple Texas regions, supply pharmacies and Texas-run clinics with much-needed MMR vaccines and other medicines and medical supplies, work with local schools and healthcare facilities to support contact investigations and to reach out to communities, including faith leaders, to answer any questions or respond to locations seeking healthcare. Since that time, the growth rates for new cases and hospitalizations have flattened. The most effective way to prevent the spread of measles is the MMR vaccine. I've spoken to Governor Abbott, and I've offered HHS's continued support. Those comments, yet again, raised a lot of eyebrows in the MAHA world. This is now the second time that Secretary Kennedy has voiced his full-throated support for the MMR vaccines. The first time, of course, was in that Fox News article, where he also offered his support and endorsement of other non-vaccine methods of trying to treat measles in Texas. Is he just playing a long game here, making sure he cozies up to the right people so he can drop bombs later? I don't know. It kind of boggles the mind. I'm surprised that we didn't get more of a fight on his confirmation in the first place. I'm wondering if some of these officials are trying to play a game here, play a long game here, and toe the line. But if this is indicative of something else, I mean, you can look at this two ways. We're only in April of the first year of the second Trump administration. Give it more time. Or we're only in April of the second Trump administration, and we're starting to see some flakes here. Because I know Kash Patel and Deputy FBI Director Dan Bongino, they have been facing some very harsh scrutiny for some other matters as well. And Deputy Director Bongino has been adamant just to be patient and wait for more results. But boy howdy, this made a lot of people very angry in the Maha world. Secretary Kennedy again voicing his full-throated support for the MMR vaccine. An Illinois man masquerading as a woman apparently walked into a women's restroom at the Florida Capitol last month and was shocked when officers standing nearby arrested him. Marcy Reingarten, a 20-year-old college student and a dude from Illinois who identifies as a woman, notified scores of public officials of his intention to defy Florida law and use a bathroom designated for females only. While visiting his grandparents in the Sunshine State earlier in March, Reingarten wrote a letter to each of the 160 state lawmakers telling them of his plans to use the ladies' room. He even included a photo of himself for easy identification. He boldly asserted in a letter, quote, "I know that you know in your heart that this law is wrong and unjust. I know that you know in your heart that transgender people are human too, that you can't arrest us away. I know that you know that I have dignity. That's why I know you won't arrest me." So when Reingarten arrived at the Capitol in Tallahassee on March 19th, Capitol Police were waiting for him. 2 officers met Reingarten outside and tried to work with him, but Reingarten insisted on using the women's room. That's according to the Miami Herald. So this dude who feels like a woman, who drove all the way to Florida to visit grandparents and decided to make a pit stop at the Florida State House, decided to mess around, and he found out, got arrested. Now, I'm waiting for the lawsuit. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced Saturday the Trump administration would begin pulling visas for South Sudanese nationals currently in the U.S. and reject any new visa requests. Rubio explained in a post on social media that the move was meant to pressure South Sudan to cooperate with America's repatriation flights as the administration works to deport illegals. Rubio wrote, quote, "I'm taking actions to revoke all visas held by South Sudanese passport holders and to restrict any further issuance to prevent entry into the United States effective immediately due to the failure of South Sudan's transitional government to accept the return of its repatriated citizens in a timely manner." According to a press release from the Department of State, the travel restrictions will ensure that South Sudan, quote, "stops taking advantage of the United States." Once again, Secretary of State Rubio, he's not really, I think he's gotten a bum rap for a lot of his career. Really what did him in, and probably deservedly so, was his involvement in the Gang of 8 amnesty plan. That did him in. He's been a fairly solid voice in the Senate, and now as Secretary of State, I thought he would do a fine job. But he has been consistently an excellent messenger for the Trump administration, really on all matters. I mean, I just heard him the other day talking about trade policy. The Secretary of State talking about trade policy. So he has done a very good job, a very honorable job, supporting the Trump administration and his post as Secretary of State. And now here's this. Trump is trying to help the gutted middle class of America. Most politicians, even Democrats, have just talked about it for my entire life. Here's an extraordinary montage from montage maker extraordinaire, at Mays Moore.
People are angry tonight, and I'll bet you the polls show it tomorrow, are middle-class, decent, honorable, middle-class people who are being crunched.
Unless we begin to figure out how to begin to rebuild the middle class and speak to the middle class, we're in deep trouble. They ain't voting for us, folks.
Every single year, the earning power of the middle class dropped.
Middle class people are getting killed. Middle class needs relief. The middle class is struggling. Barack Obama will change it. The middle class got left behind. That's why President Obama asked me to lead the middle class task force.
Middle class people actually lost.
The middle class is struggling. And right now, a middle class life is much more fragile than it needs to be or it should be. And the middle class is being screwed. If you're leaving a middle class life, that's hard. Top 1% and 2% have done exponentially better as middle class incomes have plummeted. But you know what's happened to the middle class at the beginning of this century? It's been clobbered. It's been absolutely clobbered. This is a make or break moment for the middle class. It really is. This is deadly earnest, man. This is deadly earnest. How they can justify raising taxes in the middle class has been buried the last 4 years. But you know the truth. The middle class is still in trouble. The middle class is still in trouble. The middle class is in real trouble now. Real trouble. That's what being middle class is. That's what it's about. And the middle class is being clobbered.
It's time to help the middle class, not lay more burdens on the middle class.
Everything that's happened has eviscerated the middle class. Is Donald Trump, again, not a bad guy, but his value set is totally different. He has no idea what the middle class is facing. And for a lot of middle class people who've been able to live the middle class dream, they are in danger.
Folks in the middle class are in trouble. It's not just their perception, they are in trouble.
The middle class is getting killed.
It is almost comical, like The Simpsons level comical, what you just listened to there. Going back for 40 years, Joe Biden has made the middle class a buzzword. And what you just heard there was a montage going all the way back to the 1980s when his political career began, talking every single year about helping the middle class and how the middle class is getting screwed. For 40 years, he talked about that. That's the comical part. If it weren't so real and had so many real ramifications, the middle class is just a pawn, just a talking point, not really real. Well, along comes President Trump in his second administration. He's actually trying to do something. I don't know if he'll be successful, but he's trying to reset some fundamentals about the global market in a way that hopefully benefits the little guy in this country. If you're the type of person who may have doubts about his plan going through with these tariffs, but you also admire the way he does things, as opposed to people like Joe Biden's way of not doing anything, can't really get mad at you for that. Air analysis is next. Yes, it is shocking to see how cozy the left is becoming with violent rhetoric and actions, but don't let it surprise you. It's coming up next. And finally, air analysis. Here is this story from The Federalist by M.D. Kittle. Headline: Survey: 55% of self-identified leftists say killing Trump is justifiable. The unhinged left, fueled by Trump derangement syndrome and seething hatred for Elon Musk, is trending more violent, according to a new study that finds political violence targeting President Donald Trump and his billionaire advisor is, quote, becoming increasingly normalized. And the report, produced by the Network of Contagion Research Institute in partnership with Rutgers University's Social Perception Lab, finds broader assassination culture appears to be emerging within segments of the U.S. public on the extreme left, with expanding targets now including figures such as Donald Trump. Less than a year after assassination attempts on then presidential candidate Trump and the literally explosive violence against Musk's Tesla electric vehicles, it's no secret that leftists are ratcheting up violent rhetoric and actions. The more troubling trend is that an assassination culture isn't just coming from the fringe left. These attitudes, the studies say, are not just fringe. They reflect an emergent assassination culture grounded in far-left authoritarianism and increasingly normalized in digital discourse. This report found that between 31 and 38% of respondents stated it would be at least somewhat justified to murder Elon Musk and President Trump, respectively. These effects were largely driven by respondents that self-identified as left of center, with 48% and 55% at least somewhat justifying murder for Elon Musk and President Trump, respectively. So it's not just a fringe thing in the Democrat Party anymore, but it never really was. Leftism, communism, whatever term of art you want to use to describe the left in this country and in the West, violence is inherent to those causes because it is their religion. If you religiously believe that your opponents are literally killing people, it's not too much of a stretch of the imagination or logic to believe that those people who are literally killing people with their policies deserve themselves to be killed. We just saw that in the story earlier on today's episode of that man in Texas who made threats against ICE agents and told and encouraged his followers to shoot them. Over the weekend at these AstroTurf rallies, there were signs all over the country, 8647. What does 8647 mean? Well, 86 is some sort of code that means to discontinue, disband, or dismantle something, or to discontinue something. And 47, of course, 47th President of the United States. 8647, discontinue Donald Trump. Wink, wink, nod, nod, a not-so-subtle reference to killing President Trump. Leftism always attracts violence because it is religious dogma to its adherents. It is their life. Government is the air that they breathe. The state is them. So any threats to that power, any threats to them will be met with violence. And it's easily justified in that worldview. Now, just because this is simple to understand doesn't make it any less grotesque. We must understand who we're up against. These people aren't going to course correct. They're not going to do that. They can't. They cannot. It's only going to get darker and more depraved from here. They're not just going to see the win of Donald Trump back in 2024 and say, hey, maybe we should think things through and regroup and do a strategic retreat. It's not happening, and it never was. The ideology that drives these people to commit acts of violence and cheer for those who do, that has to be rooted out once and for all. That'll do it for Tuesday. Back at it again tomorrow. I'm Aaron McIntyre, and this is the AM Update.